Welcome to another amazing episode of the Jacque Show. Today we're going to be on with Rylee June. So I'm really excited to have this particular guest on. We just shot a podcast last week. She is an intuition master coach. She helps people heal, align, and connect and expand. She is her own host on the Rylee June Show, and she does programs such as the Destiny Moment. So I'm really excited about this. We resonated on a lot of different things last time that we did this. So I'm really excited to see the direction we take here today and just this awesome conversation. So everybody strap in, listen up, and be prepared to learn. All right, everybody, thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Jacque Show. I'm here with Rylee June, and I'm so excited to have you on here. Thank you for doing this podcast with me.
Yeah, I'm so excited to be here. We had so much fun on mine. I couldn't wait to come back and connect again on yours.
A short amount of time, too. I think you did last week, we did this week. So yeah, it's just great. So I just want you to take for a minute here, just introduce yourself. Who are you and kind of what got you into this field that you're in right now?
Yeah, so I'll give you the overarching version because I love sharing this story. We all have these beautiful things that happen in our lives that seem tragic at the time that lead us to something so much more miraculous. But for me, I am an intuition master coach, which basically means that I have an emphasis. I work with life coaching. I work with people through life coaching with an emphasis on intuition. So really understanding the language of your energy. We tend to believe and think that everything we experience is based on what we can physically see, touch, hear, taste, smell. But actually, in fact, before you do any of the physical components of integrating with your reality, you actually experience everything energetically. And so I came into this world from not even knowing that this world existed, meaning that I was in a place in my life where I was grieving from a loss, and my husband had gone through a multitude of open heart surgeries, and my son had gone through one at 4 months old. And I was so confused about what I wanted to do in life. Obviously, trauma, all these, what is going on? Why is this happening to me? Was taking place in my world. And I started finding myself when we finally got the good news that we didn't need to be waiting on doctors to save my husband's life, or we didn't need to be waiting for medication adjustments to manage strokes or heart attacks, that we could actually just sit down and rest and heal. And I'd say that I never really experienced trauma in my life up until this point. And this was when I was probably from about the age, I think 23 to 26 is when I went through all of this. And that was a huge eye-opening moment for me, because in my life before that, I was very driven by the American dream, if you will. You go, you get a good job, you have a savings, you work till you're 60, 65, 70, and you hopefully retire in Arizona and play golf. And I would realize going through this that I had this huge driving factor, which was money, but it never really seemed good enough. And the more people I talked to or took witness to in their life, they were unhappy. They were in places they didn't want to be. And I had this really beautiful opportunity to really take everything that had transpired and look at it as a reset. I wasn't able to work because I had to be a full-time caregiver to my husband and my son. And I pretty much just walked around with the biggest smile on my face, pretending like everything was okay when it really wasn't. And I feel like a lot of people can relate to that, because we all do it until we really get into the depths of healing. And, I just looked at this opportunity like, we have no savings. I'm not working. We get to create something. I don't know what it is, but something to hopefully not have my husband dying anymore, trying to pay the bills. And I found myself in a certified psychic mediumship course. And I was the person who never talked about those things. I don't know if I even necessarily believed in them. Like, I'd heard of psychics, and I think I had like a reading before in my life, but I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. I found myself in this course, and I thought, well, at the very least, I'll put my attention and effort into it, because I know if one person can do something, anyone can. It just takes time, attention, and intention. And I thought at the very least, maybe I could, connect with my aunt who had passed all the grief that I was facing, and maybe I could heal that. Yeah. And it led me into, I remember 6 out of 18 weeks in, I was sitting there with my mouth wide open. I couldn't believe what I was learning. I thought that this was the craziest thing, that people didn't know about this stuff. And ultimately at this point, I was just learning about intuition. And all of a sudden, everything in my life just started to make sense. Why I had these crazy moments in my life where I had an intervention at a stoplight. I had been driving to a friend's house late at night, I think when I was like 17 or 18. And I pulled up to this light and I couldn't move. Like couldn't move. My foot was on the gas, frozen in time. And I remember sitting in the car and like yelling in my head, like, go, the light now turned green, like, go, why aren't you moving? Go. And I just kept sitting there and I was going nuts. And it felt like I probably sat there for like 10 minutes and it really was only like 30 seconds. And as soon as all of a sudden this wave of energy released, I was able to go through this light. And just as I took my foot off the pedal, this car came barreling through what had been their red light at 100 kilometers an hour. I would have been toast. And so I always remember that experience. I'm like, what happened? Like, I remember driving there the whole way, like just silent with my eyes open, like what just took place. And I had many different experiences throughout life, but I never thought anything of it. And this course really opened my eyes to, there is so much more out there that we are not taught or told, or we ever think to look at, because we just don't know. And I'd start showing up online and basically telling people this good news. Hey guys, I've been on MIA for 2.5 years, but guess what? I'm a medium. And when I thought I had originally gone on this private Facebook page that I'd set up where I was like, okay, well, I'll just start here where nobody can see me. I ended up going live on my personal page and just outed myself right away. So,
well, sometimes you need that push, and sometimes a push is a shove, and it works.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, just to like put a bow on this, it led me to this path of just realizing that there was so many components and elements to our lives that we just don't understand, and we're blindly not told about for a specific reason. And it led me into holistic healing and just understanding more natural remedies and just better care overall of ourselves. And the more I kept showing up and sharing with people how they could connect with their intuition and, reverse engineering tens of thousands of readings that I had done, I really started to realize that not only am I just not some special person that can do this, but we all truly can. And it just, like I said in the beginning, takes time, attention, and intention. And I watched women's and men's lives radically change from just learning how they work energetically. Anxiety was disappearing. Years of depression diagnoses were going away. People were feeling confident and courageous and changing their lives in the most miraculous ways. And at first I thought, well, I don't know how I'm doing this. But then the more that I kept doing it, I was like, oh, I do. It's the energy. It's the same thing I showed up online for to tell everybody else about. They're applying it and it's really working.
Yeah. I mean, there's so many gems in all of what you said. There's like so many like thoughts of like, how like thoughts and audios to me, like I was big with audios, especially when I lived in Houston. I would work out and I would listen to some sort of audio, chiropractor speaking or some like epigenetic or, quantum physics. And I remember Richard J. Santo, he's talking about quantum energy and like we're basically all just energetic beings for like an earthly experience. And he brought up an example. I don't remember if I told you this story. I know I talked to somebody about it last week. Did I tell you about the deer and the newspaper and the trees?
No.
Oh, this is like a really cool story. Maybe I did it on my own podcast by myself, but either way, it's a super cool story. There were a whole bunch of deer that were just randomly dropping dead. And these people are like, they're not being mauled. They're not like, nobody's attacking these things. They're just falling down and boom, that's it. And like, what could possibly be doing this? So they're going around and they're trying to take samples from like just different vegetation or the different poison and things that are out there. And they couldn't find anything. And the reporter, I guess, had a newspaper and smacked the tree. And then they took a sample of the tree after it was smacked and it turned into an acidic poison that was killing the deer. Not just that tree, but then for miles in every direction, there was an energetic warning for all the trees to produce the same acid to protect themselves from the certain threat. So wow, it's super cool. Like when you hear these stories from, this is probably 10 years ago, I heard this, and now we're like kind of superimposing it into today. Like the the expansiveness and control that you're able to get back from your life, I think is massively empowering. And you and I talked about this. That's what it's all about, is empowering ourselves to be our own health advocates, to be able to take care of ourselves, because the system only gets us so far. But when it comes to what makes you healthy, they drop the ball. They have no idea. And it's never been more apparent.
Yeah.
Now, I do have, so you can answer this if you want to, because I know, and I know I'm going to get crap for just asking this question from some followers because people have asked it. So like my wife, Megan, is like, she's all about this as well. Like she's tapped in, like she lost it a little bit just because we all had like some stomach bug last week. So it was like, it tamped us down, physical interrupted our divinity. But when we post this stuff, okay, because you went live on your page, like I was raised Catholic. She was raised like 15 different religions. And so like now we're straddling like in between, where it's like, we know that there's a divine being. We know that there's like a God or whatever you want to call it. But then when we talk about tapping into intuition, you'll hear people come out of nowhere, be like, that's witchcraft. How dare you do that? And like, we're using the power that is inside us. What about that is witchcraft? Have you run into that? Have you had people say that?
Okay, buckle up.
Yeah,
because
let's do
this
it.
is going to be the most.
I told you we're connected. There's a reason.
So good. Just this is my favorite. So this is what I say. Jesus was a psychic and his disciples were mediums. What do I mean by that? He is someone who walked the purest, cleanest, clearest life with honesty, integrity, and justice. He wasn't worried about who was going to say what. He knew his path. And he always foretold the future as he was connected with his beautiful divine word of God. When he passed, his disciples walked the land with his spirit. They saw him, they heard him, they connected to him, and they preached the words that he was giving to them in those moments. And so for me, it's really fascinating because my husband really came into this like light bulb moment in his life. He had I'll share this quick story of one miracle that took place, and it's super relevant to what you just shared. And just this topic, it just lights me up for so many reasons.
Good.
So when these things happened to him, when he was going through all his surgeries, I knew none of this stuff. I was just like in it for the train that we were going, and I didn't know where it was ending. And there was one evening where he was getting scheduled for a 5th open heart surgery. He had 2 a week prior. So he went in for a 3rd, which was to repair so much complication and damage. There was a hole in his heart that they missed, and he ended up going back in 16 hours after that. And then a week later, he started getting presented with this super rapid infection. And so he came back into the hospital a week later, and they started preparing him for this 5th surgery. And he was in no shape to even be walking, let alone go in for another surgery. And he was never necessarily someone who followed a Catholic religion. He grew up with it. Sunday Christians was kind of his family dynamic. And I love when I say that everybody gets it.
Yeah.
It was this point where he really just gave it all up to God. Everyone had left for him. He had said his goodbyes, and he had dropped on his knee and just sobbed and said, either heal me or take me, because I don't have it in me to do anything else. And at this point, he was having severe night sweats. So he had left the room so the nurses could come in and they could change his sheets. And when he came back into the room, it was dark. And the only thing that was lit up was his phone on the table. And when he walked up to it, and he wasn't even using it, when he walked up to it, it was open to a song on YouTube by an artist of Danny Goki that's called Tell Your Heart to Beat Again. Okay. And the whole premise of the song is saying that his pastor wanted to witness an open heart surgery, and he had a heart surgeon in his congregation, and the surgeon agreed to let him come and take witness to this experience. And when the heart surgeon went to restart this woman's heart, it wouldn't start mechanically. It just wouldn't work. Yeah. And they'd done all the things that they're supposed to do by the procedures. And he did something so unconventional, and he got down on his knees and he said, Mrs. Jones, the great physician has healed your heart. It is time for you to tell your heart to beat again. And then it just goes into this beautiful song. And in that moment, he says that he felt like God had answered his prayer. Well, 8 hours later, they were running his blood work every 4 hours to just make sure that the infection wasn't progressing worse and worse, or when they needed to get him in. Yeah. And they'd come in and they're like, I don't know what happened. We've been following your blood work, but you have no more infection. it is gone. It's disintegrated. It's gone back into your bone marrow. We don't know what happened. So they ran a few more tests over a series of a couple of days, and they ended up discharging him. And from that day on, he got better. We came to find out that he ended up, he hasn't had, which caused a lot of those other surgeries, bacteria in his blood and other tissues that's caused complications since. But from that place on, there's just been miracle after miracle after miracle, divine intervention after divine intervention. And for him, that was the moment where he really realized that God exists and I need to take this way more seriously than I am. And he went through 2 years following that or a year and a half, 2 years of a lot of PTSD just from the experience alone, from everything. And one day I was reading Phil Robinson's book, Happy, Happy, Happy. Okay. And in that book, he talks about how he found God. He was doing all these nefarious things. And one day a pastor came in and he talked to him. And essentially from that point, he turned his life around. And he just made such a beautiful point that, everywhere in history, they try and get around this book. But this is the only book that's lasted time with such a strong morale that is about everlasting life. And you could try and get around it, but you're going to reach the same D-Day that everybody else does. And it took him 3 days. He said, when you get hit by Jesus, it's like a freight train and you don't walk away from that the same person. And so for me, when he had this moment with Jesus, I was doing everything I was doing at this point. I was doing the mediumship. I was doing the readings and using the oracle cards, which I never thought to look into. What does oracle mean? Which is occultic rituals. Essentially, I'm like, ooh, okay, well, there's certain things we can maybe leave out of this. And for me, I really struggled with it because I was like, I have watched faith transform our lives. I very much have a strong connection, and I don't want to do something that could cause me problems down the road because I blindly just chose not to look into it.
Right.
And the more I came into my faith, the more I only connected with people who were willing and open to learn, and even spirit connections who were very much of strong Christian faith. And it was really fascinating to me because before that happened, I would connect with people, all different experiences, spirits who were angry drunks or abusers or, just kind of lived life and carried their guilt, or people who weren't really willing to necessarily go deeper, but they wanted help.
Right.
And the stronger I became in my faith, that energy then attracted more people of faith or open and seeking that experience. And it was really fascinating to me because when I realized that the only spirits I'm connecting to are the ones who come up and they show me the rosary right away, and it's strong, and you feel when you're in deep prayer, you feel that channel with God. It is unlike anything you could buy yourself. And so I realized that I don't know why I'm resisting this so much, because when you communicate with one source, the only source I believe we should communicate with, you're energetically going to only attract those things. And people stop being, the people who come into my world to coach or to train or to learn, they stopped being so deceived. They were able to ground, because the act of grounding is to root into something. So what are you rooting into? The anxiety issues, the depression issues, the consumerism issues, from consumption of all the things to taking 100 different courses, all of it, the distractions. They started finding these really powerful linear paths for themselves. And of course, healing is never linear, but the only thing that really is follow the word of God, live by the 10 commandments. And it's basically the promissory to the best life ever. And, people argue that, but it's like, be a good person, don't murder, don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal. It's like, I think that's a pretty clear direction. Yeah. It's like it's almost a no-brainer, right?
So that to be labeled isn't that just what you should do anyways?
Yeah. Exactly. So for me, I was like, you know what? I'm not going to resist this anymore because I'm using my gift for good. People connecting to their intuition through my work is that they're learning to listen to the word of God. And you can go deeper and you can read into the scriptures as well. But it's like, and I know that there's a whole scripture about stay away from the psychics and stay away from the mediums. But I'm like, you look at what the disciples did and you look at the life that Jesus lived. He was a psychic. His disciples were mediums. So where are you sourcing your word? And lead from that place, because ultimately, if you're following God, you're working with your intuition. You will foretell your future to a degree. And again, it just comes down to where you're sourcing that energy from.
I love that. Yeah, that was beautifully orchestrated in there. And it's again, like I forget what Megan posted something. I shared it on my page, like a sacred elements, like just about like earth, wind, fire, water, all that stuff. And somebody popped out and was like, "That's witchcraft." I'm like, God gave us these freaking elements. What are you talking about? Like, we're not running around with goat's blood and like splashing. Are you thinking like what? So anyway, so I'm glad you were able to try to like put that spin on that. Now I am curious, do you see like certain patterns, like male, female? Do you see a lot of the same things today, or are you seeing a trend where people are going a certain way in terms of like their spiritual dis-ease?
Yeah. So from my understanding of your questions, what do you see as a trend or a pattern for people turning to spirituality from their discomfort?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So I find that women are more open to learning, but they're more resistant to God. Whereas men have an innate loyalty that they carry within themselves and this like strength, masculinity. And I find that they're way more open and susceptible to the conversations, depending on their level of hurt. And really that kind of is relevant between both sexes. But I find that women want to people please more. So universe is safe. Whereas men, they're pretty like set in, okay, what's the best way? And let me do it that way. And they're more open to just listening and then finding their own way in it, which is how it works anyways, which is really interesting to me because women are the quickest to jump into spirituality. There's this promised area of this, beautiful, magical life. And honestly, it is. But when it comes down to having them actually root into that sense of loyalty, I find that even assuming they weren't raised or exposed or experienced some form of Catholic belief before, that that's a big people pleasing thing for them to work through. And it's interesting because with my husband, he's like, just tell them about God, just let Jesus do the work. And I'm like, okay, I get it. Believe me, I do. And yes, absolutely. However, when you're fighting someone's subconscious that's kicking in that says, I need to be accepted, it's not as easy than being like, oh, okay, sounds good. Thanks. Yeah, I'm going to do that. Right. It's like telling somebody, if you just do these 3 steps, your whole life will change. If they don't have that aha moment for themselves, no matter who you are, they're not going to really listen to it. Right. You have to lead people to understanding that they're in the driver's seat until then you let them realize that they've never been in the driver's seat.
Yeah. No, I love it. The driver's seat and the not the driver's seat, just the exposing of it. And I know that like from patients and clients and stuff that I'll work with too, especially like the female side of things, there seems to be a trend that I see in terms of distrust with like male figures from a lot of like, whether it was emotional abuse from a dad or a preacher or something like that tends to give them that negative spin off of it versus men were not as emotional. It's kind of not how we were really designed. We're logical thinkers. Not that women aren't logical, but our main drive is that testosterone. We just want to do. And you're right, women do want to people please, but then you start sacrificing yourself and your divinity to conform to other people's expectations of you. And then that does lead into that anxiety and that depression. And so sometimes first uprooting that and say like, hey, did you forget about this? This is why you act and respond the way you do. Now, what are we going to do about this? How are we going to overcome this so you can reach more of your divinity? Yeah. We went off on a bunch of tangents. That's good.
It's good. I love it because human psychology, I always wanted to be a psychologist or a lawyer until I learned how much time schooling would take for that and how much money. And I was like, no, I don't think I want to do it that bad. And then now it's fascinating because, just the way of the world, it led me to want to dig more into rights and freedoms. And then with the work that I do as well, it's like, well, not only what are those rights and freedoms, but also what's the dynamic of everybody right now and like how they're really seeing the world split was so fascinating to me. A lot of people are like, oh, the world's divided and it's so bad. It's like, to a degree, it sucks. Yes, there's a lot of chaos, but it's like when you look at it more from a psychological component, and that was something that I really dove into very early on when I realized that offering a reading isn't just telling somebody about their potential future or sharing a message from a loved one. You're holding space for grief, potential burdens, anger, resentment, fear, all those things. And they're all going to come up when you start telling people about their life. Yeah. Especially when like I got to the point 2 years ago where I didn't even need the cards. So I just tell messages based on what I feel. And it's really interesting when people are like, whoa, like, how did you know that? It's like, I'm literally just intuition. I'm reading your energy, right? We all can do this. It's this innate language that we have. What's so fascinating about it is the more I dug into the psychological component of behavior and how people process things and perception and ideologies and how that all plays a factor, it was like, oh, obviously I can see how the world has split. And it's really opened up my eyes so much to, and I'm not going to say that every Christian was perfect in this because we're all on a learning journey anyways, sure. But the ones who really stood in their faith were very much against everything that was happening. And then you watch Christians being the most persecuted, at least in Canada. We've had some jailed for literally just preaching the word and giving food to the homeless and ended up in solitary confinement.
What?
Yeah, it's crazy, which I'm like,
Canada, like,
I'm like, thank God, because now your country's opening up for passing a bill for asylum. So I'm like, all right, I'm a Christian, let me in.
Come to Phoenix. You'll love it here. I'll get you in contact with everybody I know. Like, because that's the thing is like, when you step into this, you gravitate this, and like how we connected, like it had to have been like some sort of spiritual thing. Like there's no, like, I hate social media. We talked about this. I don't like it, but like I get on it to say hi and stuff. And like, we immediately started communicating. We're like, let's do this. Let's shoot a podcast. And each episode that we did, I mean, last week was phenomenal. This one probably is better. So now I'm, a little jealous, but, but when we came out here, like this was a huge energetic thing for us where Megan is my wife. Megan is not used to really setting down roots anywhere. Like when she was growing up, her parents would like move houses all around like northern Maine and stuff, so close to Canada, but never really like had roots set. And for me, like my parents were still in the house that I was like born and raised in basically. Now we had a house that we don't really count. I think I moved out when I was 3, but like they've had that house for at least 30 some years. Yeah. And that's the homestead. Like you can't pry my dad's butt out of the couch. Like that's his place. That's his solitude. And so we were in Houston, we were uneasy there. We were in Pittsburgh, we were uneasy there. And then the biggest energetic shift, like Megan started doing some deep dives into like, the sacred healing and things and like really bringing up some of those past traumas and doing that healing. And we were like, well, we don't want to be in Pittsburgh. Where do we want to be? And so we set out feelers. We're like, let's just go back down to Houston. We know people down there, it'd be a smooth transition, should be easy to get a house. And it was like, God did not want us to go there. Like every single obstacle, the crazy freeze that took place down in like all of the areas that we were looking at renting, like all of them swept through. They're like, you're not getting a house. We're like, what are we going to do then? And so I have a buddy in Charleston. His wife actually does a lot of this work too, Taylor. And so we were like, well, we could go to Charleston. I know another buddy down there. My speaking coach is down there, Roberto. And I'm like, we could go there. So we try and boom, nothing. We're like, what the heck? So Megan was like, well, where do you want to go? I'm like, well, let's go to Arizona. Like, let's just go to Arizona. So we went here. We had a business meeting in January. And then when we rerouted, that was February. So we went back to back in Arizona. And we always joked about retiring here. Yeah. And we were like, why would we wait to retire? It's beautiful here. Every time we come here, it's amazing. Yeah. And we did. And we got a house in no time. We were able to purchase this house. We bought this house for Christmas, basically. Like, the amount of abundance and love and like that, it's overflowing. So I think the point I'm trying to get at is the more that you're in flow, the more that you're in alignment with the divinity, I think about it like wavelengths. Are you at dis-ease where your wavelengths are uneven, or are you in sync? And the more in sync you are, the stronger you are, the more intuitive you are. You might be scared by how intuitive you are, but it helps you on this path. And we all have this innate power inside us. So I'm so happy that you're pulling it out of people and helping people, because God, is it needed.
It's so needed. And that's the thing that I'm finding is that more people have turned to Jesus in these last 2 years than ever before, because the only thing they had left at the end of the day was faith. Somehow this all gets sorted out. And it's so beautiful because I would have never thought that I'd be that person on that train either. And I can't imagine life without it. It's like beyond, my family. That's the only other thing that I hold as that top priority and value is that relationship. And I'm not going to pretend and sit here like I'm perfect and I can quote scriptures because I can't, because I'm, digging into it and I'm learning. I just recently started opening up a Bible again. And it's, really interesting to me because at the end of the day, just even going back to that analogy that I said, you can pretend you're in the driver's seat until literally everything shuts down in front of you. And ultimately, the only reason it's doing that is so that you realize and accept that you've been in the passenger seat all along. There is a much bigger, grand orchestrated plan that's working for you. And it's so beautiful about intuition is that, like, it's so funny they said that you're probably going to, scare yourself with how intuitive you are.
Yeah.
That's what everybody comes to find is that I do this specific exercise with people where before I kind of dig into it, I'll just preface that if anybody wants to try this at home, I highly recommend you do this only with the permission of others, because then you're really doing a disservice to that person. But I'll do this exercise with people where I will provide them with a name of nobody that they've met before, and just the name, no picture, no context, nothing. And I give them a structure and I say, okay, connect. Like, what do you feel, hear, see, and know? And I'll give them a set amount of time and they'll sit there and I'll turn everything off so they can't see me or in person, whatever. And I'll walk away. And I come back and they have, some people have a couple points. Some people have a whole list, depending on, there's two factors, depending on how much they know about intuition leading up to that point. And then the other one is how connected they are to God. I did this exercise with a woman she's through and through. I followed Jesus before I was born. And it was so fascinating because she had no intuition training, very logical person, but she did this exercise so flawlessly. And I was like, oh yes, like make my point even better. Like, I love this. They'll sit down and they'll share, okay, well, I got this and I got this and I got this and I felt this. And then I'll sit there and I'm always so excited because they have no idea what they're doing. I'm sitting there, I'm like, oh, you're nailing it. This is amazing. Yeah. And I'll validate it with the story of that person. And they're all like, how did I just do that? Like, what just happened? How did I know that? And then we dig into, how did you do that? Well, let me show you, not only from the scientific components of how energy moves through your body, but also from the faith components, right? Because when you expand, and this is something that is really important to spiritual health, when you expand your consciousness, you can't just open up and then everything just makes sense. You have to do it in levels and layers. It's like, if you think about, there's a lot of studies done with psilocybin drugs on this and expanded consciousness, and people who have prophetic experiences, but then if given too much, they will lose their sense of reality because their mind is so blown open, I guess is the easy way to say it. Well, the same thing happens with expanding your consciousness manually, though way more safe to do it that way. Yeah. But you have to do it in layers. And there's a reason why there's a Reiki level 1, 2, and master. There's a reason why there's a quantum level 1, 2, and master. It's because if you were to go to master quantum and you never understood any of the foundational components, you had no practice, you had no, prior routines or habits, you're going to shock your nervous system. And a lot of people come into this thinking like, I want to go to the top. Like, how do I just get into the master level?
Quickest way,
like, exactly, right? And there's that instant gratification coming in, or, get there faster. It's like the beautiful thing about spirituality and really opening yourself up is that as you do it in levels and layers, it becomes such a profound experience because you start to remember the beauty that exists in your life. What do I mean by remembering it? Well, we walk through this life on autopilot, our unconscious mind totally in control until we start to wake up. So that term, great awakening or going through an awakening or an ascension, it's you becoming alive, you turning your brain on again. And with that requires roots. And if you have no roots and you just work your way to the top, anxiety, depression, overwhelm, inconsistency, you're going to feel like a scattered mess. And a lot of people don't understand this because spirituality paints this picture of unlimited manifestation. You're going to get the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, basically. And, that is true to a degree, but it's like, you have to work your way there because otherwise it's basically the statistics of winning the lottery. 87% of people who win the lottery end up more broke than they were before getting it. And it's the same thing with spirituality. If you have nothing, no foundation underneath that, you're going to end up more spiritually broke, mentally, emotionally, physically broke than you were going in. And so it's so fascinating because we're all capable of this. It's our innate birthright. And it's so beautiful to see the world turning on to this because it's who we are. It's what we're supposed to do. And it ultimately brings in more love and compassion that we're all seeking to have anyways.
Yeah. And I like that you brought up the psilocybin stuff, because I know a lot of, like, I have patients and other people that I know that microdose or use psilocybin, some other stuff. And I've used like plant medicine, but it's frog medicine. I've done combo and bufo various. And so Bufo, my facilitator that administered that, gave me an audiobook that I was listening to. And it's basically like, when you do Bufo, you basically open up and you see the divine. Like that's boom, like it shoves you into it and boom, it kills the ego. And then it's like, it's crazy. Scary, but crazy. But what it was basically saying is like, once you know the truth, it's hard to then unknow the truth. And so that's the other thing too, is like once you've had the veil kind of lifted, you have to be open to the fact that the way that you were seeing life previously may not have been true. Yeah. Do you agree?
Yeah. And that shocks a lot of people because you're not just questioning one aspect of your life, you're questioning everything. The relationships that you thought you had, whether they be what they were or not, the job, careers, the path, the way you view money, the way you view yourself, the way you view the world, the way you view others. Everything gets questioned. And I find that for a lot of people, that's something that they come into this not realizing is one of the foundational components of spiritual growth and ultimately just personal evolution. But it's something that people struggle with because even going back to that question about who struggles more essentially, or who turns, I guess, quicker to the spiritual components or really is led by God is women really struggle with, well, I've kept everything neutral and, you know, it wasn't neutral, but like, at least I know what to predict. Yeah. And men are like, okay, well, let's improve this. Like, how do I get better? You know, for the most part, I know I'm generalizing, but that's at least what I've experienced and seen. And so it's fascinating because when you start questioning that, like you said, you can't unsee it. You can't unsee where someone's gaslighting you or has been your whole life. And you thought that they just didn't get it. This was a big one for my husband is he thought that his family just didn't get it. And it turns out they've been gaslighting him the whole time. And that was really hard for him because at least in the naivety of they don't get it, there was an ease to it. But now it became almost malicious. And it's not necessarily that they were doing it on purpose. They didn't know they were doing it, but it's what they were doing. He had to have that acceptance of saying like, hey, look it, like you don't get to do this anymore. And I've had similar experiences in my life too with girlfriends where it's like, I grew up with 6 girlfriends from grade 2 up until I was, 23 years old when I went through everything that I started going through. And it was even before I got into anything with spirituality, just the comments that were made and the things that were said and the way that they showed up when life got hard was a big eye-opening moment for me. And then when I started getting to the actual healing and energy aspect of it, I was like, oh, these were never really friendships to me. Like I'm grateful for them. You know, there's a lot of great times, but that was more of a learning lesson that I totally ignored for 18, 19 years of my life. So
yeah, we had similarities with that as well with my in-laws and stuff with huge cathartic experience. Meg was in her 3rd trimester of pregnancy. Just everything exploded. Like it was insane. And from that, she was like, you know what? She started seeing things for like what they were. And so she would rewind the wheel of time and she'd be like, oh, and then this happened. And it was like all those suppressed memories and experiences that like she didn't really think of. And she's like, suppress. And all of a sudden she'd be like meditating or just doing some breath work. And then boom, it would pop up. She'd be like, what was that? And then she'd come and be like, this is another thing. I'm like, how many things? Like my childhood, I had some damage in my childhood. Yeah. I'm like, I turned out okay. Like I'm resilient, but I like just the stuff that was going through. I'm like, oh my gosh. And it's so good. And it's so healthy to set those boundaries. And I don't want to say this in like a too negative of a light. You know, we can have friends that are friends of ours for a season, a reason, or a lifetime, in my opinion. Yeah. And sometimes those were actual friendships, but then other times it's like, you do a stool test analysis and you realize you've got 5 parasites hanging out in your gut and you had no idea the whole time. if you do that inventory on your friends, you're like, this person only ever asks me to do stuff for them. I have to always help them move. I have to drive so-and-so to the store because of this. And it's like, wait a second, like I'm doing an inventory now. This is a very lopsided relationship, which is then what I would call that a parasitic relationship. And so it could be eye-opening, it could be uncomfortable. And then just like killing a parasite, it's uncomfortable to remove a parasite, but it's growth, it's expansion, it's stepping more into who you are and setting up those healthy boundaries so that you don't replace, you know, one person with the same exact person in the next relationship that you make at the grocery store, you know?
Yeah.
But I mean, in terms of like alignment and things, like one of the things that one of my, I'll call him mentor, he's a friend of mine too, Dr. Will Cool, good dude from outside Pittsburgh. And he had a clinic open. We moved to Pittsburgh and I took him out for coffee the one time, or maybe he took me out for coffee. We met for coffee and I was like, buddy, like I'm struggling right now. I'm like, I'm trying to do like what you're doing right now. And he's like, well, you're doing everything that I do. He goes, but you're missing one piece. I'm like, what is it? And he was like, you should just tithe a little bit. I'm like, what? And he goes, just, you know, find a good church, tithe to that and start getting into the word. I'm like, really? And he goes, yeah, it's the only thing that you're not doing. Give it a shot. And within like 2 months, numbers were like, poof, they shot up. I'm like, what the heck? And then so like we'd have a running joke, like we would increase that tithe. And like the more we would increase the tithe, we'd get like an influx of new patients or an influx of growth. And I'm like, hon, like I'm only one person ship here, like doing the doctoral stuff. Like maybe next time don't tithe as much so that way we don't get as much blessings. Like, it was just like a joke, but really like when you step into that alignment, more is going to be brought to you. And we talked like money is energy, money is currency. And so if you vibrate at that energy and God sees you as responsible with your financials and you're giving back and you're doing good things with your money, you're going to see good things. Now, I'm going to take it to the next level to see your opinion on this. I know a lot of people who have a lot of money, but then are some of the most corrupt people I've ever met in my entire life. So when you bring somebody into the awareness that doing good brings good, but then you see people doing evil and getting more than you, how do you interpret that? How do you kind of lay that out for people who are curious?
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, to me, the first thing that comes to mind is where are you rooting your energy into? Because the devil knows God's name and he works with the same source of energy that you might think you're working with too. The difference is that one direction promises this everlasting life as long as you are filled with justice and mercy and, you know, you repent for the bad things that you do. And you know, a lot of people get tied up in that. They're like, oh, I'm not a sinner. And it's like, okay, well, have you lied? Yes. Well, have you ever cheated even on a test? Yes. Did you ever steal in your life? Maybe, maybe not. Okay. Did you ever ask for forgiveness? So it's like people want to be so self-righteous in it. And so going back to your question is that my question to them is, or I guess the first thing that I think of is where are you rooting yourself into? And your example is so beautiful because it's truly, you know, when you do not have God, what do you have? Well, there's only one of two promissory sources. So it's like the devil. And a lot of people don't like to use that word because it's, well, I don't want to associate myself with that. I'm a good person, but it's okay. Go back to the 10 commandments. Are you stealing? Have you cheated? Have you lied? And it's, you know, white lies count too. We have this whole thing with, I'm going to kind of tail off for a second and come back. So it's relevant. We have this whole thing with, you know, Christmas. So Santa Claus, he brings these gifts. And I was like to my husband, I was like, you know, white lies are lies. So why don't we just acknowledge that we work hard every year and let our children know that we provide them these gifts. And if we want to honor the tradition of St. Nicholas, which is, you know, the one who gave to the poor, we'll go through their toys with them. They can pick some stuff out. We can go and donate them. You know, we can honor it in that way. But let's be unified in this message, right? And so, you know, those who chase money are essentially chasing self-fulfillment and greed, because at the end of the day, money isn't even what brings you happiness. I know some super wealthy people and some super poor people, and there is, you know, some of both are totally miserable and some of them are totally fulfilled. And it's not because of what they have. It's because of the faith that they have. And that was really fascinating to me because when I got into a lot of the work that I did, I was like, okay, so what does the top look like? Like, let's say there's a ceiling. What does that look like? Who's there? in the spiritual industry, in personal development industry. Obviously, Tony Robbins, everyone goes directly to that one. He's made quite the name for himself in the best of ways, but he has a huge ethos on generosity. And he is someone who talks often about breathing and living the word of God. And every story that I came to look at, the foundation of their story was they were either rooted in God or they found God. And to me, that was really fascinating because as the people pleaser that I was like, oh, if I use universe, this can all just be mystical. Everybody can be happy.
Yep.
I continuously watched people come up in their field and whatever they were doing, even just through following on Instagram. And it was the same thing. It was when they were solely focused on building and getting, they were always stuck and miserable and limited. And when they started opening up to God, reading, living the word of Jesus, it changed everything for them. And I was like, this is such a fascinating dynamic because there is a clear, nothing is ever left or right, black or white. Like there's always so much more to it, infinite possibilities, but it's so hard to dispute that there is something other than these two components, right? There is dark and there is light. There's a spectrum, sure, but there's still only those two sides. So there's some things we really just get to come into acceptance of, and the science backs it up. And it's like faith is essentially the same thing. You can be with all of these other things, or you can be with this one. And so for the people who struggle or the corruption, there's no way they're working with God because they just can't be. Someone who is hoarding or stealing or cheating or lying or deceiving, there is no generosity in that. And it's just out for personal gain. So that's my long-winded answer.
No, I like it because I view it very similar to you. And then I also view it as, they've got a void. To me, I'm like, there's something dead inside that they're refusing to, or broken inside that they're refusing to pay attention to. And so they just get distracted by money or accomplishing or buying another business or another, and it just keeps shoving that down deeper and deeper and deeper. And it's like gluttony where you just don't stop and you just overconsume. And like you said, when it comes to like the main difference between rich people being happy or rich people being miserable, or again, other end of things, it comes down to me, it's the strong why. Why are you doing this? Are you doing this out of greed? Or are you doing this because you're making a massive difference in the lives of people? And as long as you have that good intention, you're going to be more fulfilled than somebody who could have, $10 billion and you're like, well, they're freaking miserable and they're hiding behind that $10 billion. They're trying to purchase everything, every car, every house, because they're so miserable inside and they can't figure out that they just need to kind of look internally.
Yeah. And I really love this topic for a multitude of reasons, but really for the emphasis that we've been so trained and taught that money is the currency, that is what sets you up. It gets you freedom. You have these beautiful lives. And let's not pretend like you don't. Like everyone says, money can't buy you happiness. I disagree. I think that it can, because it can buy you a lot of freedom. But then you have to look at what's underneath that, because the freedom's great and the money's great and the travels and the adventures and all the things are great. But at the end of the day, that can also all be taken away. Somebody dies, something happens, a tornado comes ripping through and takes it all away. Like there's a multitude of reasons how that can just get taken away. So then if that were to happen, what do you have left? And that's where really people find that humbleness in that connection to their faith. And I think that that's so fascinating for so many reasons, because at the root of everything you do, it's like, this is the main thing that I always ask people when they come into connection with me. I'm like, what is the energy that you are sourced into? And they're like, well, like universe. Some of them say God. And I'm like, okay, how does that make you feel? And right away, they'll go on these spirals depending on where they're connected into. And you just watch their mind try and find. Whereas like, if you're someone who's rooted in a strong faith, you don't have to find anything, And so going back to money, it's fascinating because we've been trained and conditioned that money is the commodity. Money is our source of everything. It's not, it's commodity. At this point, or since 1983, it hasn't been the same as we thought that it was supposed to be. Savings accounts, 401ks, all those things are not what you think that they are on TV. And what actually is the currency is our energy. And when you really start to open yourself up, that's what you start to realize. It's like, oh, my energy is more valuable than my money. That's why I'm reassessing my relationships. I'm reassessing my vision. I'm reassessing my attention. I'm reassessing my intention, and ultimately my why of what am I here for? I think for anyone who's listening, if you want to sit and really get into this for yourself, ask yourself the question, why am I on Earth? There's 9 planets. They tell us we can only exist on one. Who knows if that's true or not at this point, but let's say that it is. Why are you here? Did you just drop out of the cosmos one day and just get shown, I don't know what to do? Here we go. Yeah. Like, why? Why are you here? And for a lot of people, that really gets them, because it's like, I don't know. And then they start the search, and curiosity is what really leads the way.
Yeah. And I'm a big believer of, like, to me, when we get created, it's like our soul goes through and it's looking at our resume of what's going to happen in our life. And they're like, oh, this is going to happen here. Okay, here. So they already know the checklist. Like, I am going to commit to this. This is going to be a bumpy ride, but let's jump into this. And so soul jumps in, conception happens, etc. You're born and you're on this earth, and you see that childhood divinity where, like, kids are just kids. They can appreciate the smallest things. Like, we got my son like this really cool little 2-seater car because our daughter wants to ride in it with him, and they played in a freaking box. Like, they didn't even want to play in the car. I'm like, okay. But like, as we go through that, sometimes if we don't have a strong spiritual leader or a strong church or somebody that can lead us in that direction, we have a tendency, especially in America, that we start to fall from faith. And we start questioning things, and we start finding these voids. And I remember going to Catholic Mass, and I'm like, I didn't get anything out of that. And I was an altar boy. I'm like, I don't get anything. Like, I'm just doing the motions. I'm doing squats and getting down on knees. And I'm like, I don't know what this is. And then when we started going to like churches that actually explained like what the heck was going on in the Bible, I'm like, where the heck was that? Why did it have to take me 25 years to find this? Like, this makes so much more sense. Like, so I think if people have been burned in the past from bad experiences, just like bad doctors, bad whatevers, there may be bad, intuition coaches that are out there as well, selling snake oils and all that crap. But you can't automatically assume that everyone is going to be that way. You have to give it another shot, especially if you feel it in your gut and your intuition is trying to speak to you and it's making you uneasy. It's trying to push you forward. It's trying to make you so uncomfortable that you have no other choice but to step forward and experience life in a different way. So that's kind of my take on that too.
I 100% agree. There's, like I said, light and dark in everything. And I always say that there's 2 reasons why a person, place, or thing is ever placed in your path. And it's either a mirror of reflection for validation or a lesson for you to pay attention. And when you start to look at everything you're placed with and you lead with that self-assessment with that in mind, it really just brings a disconnect from the emotional component, because now you can really see things more clearly. And 2, it really gets you thinking. Intuition is about curiosity, because at some point you're following an intuitive life with blind faith. And it's the curiosity of what's on the other side of this decision or what's on the other side of this path. That is what brings passion and purpose to people. And then the driver ultimately is why. And so you get to experience lessons. And I think a lot of people, our subconscious mind wants to protect us from getting disappointed. That's its whole purpose. It starts punching you in the face when you're going to change your habits, and it already knows what's going to happen. And then people scary away from that. But it's, life, right? Sometimes things happen, you can't predict them. So if you at least have this grounded, rooted connection to faith, and you have a community and you are doing those self-assessments, and you understand that the world is equally just as good as it is bad, I find people are a lot more willing to try, at the very least try and find their way. Because just as there's bad doctors, there are people in this industry that are leading others into cults. So, I mean, it's everywhere.
You have to
you just have to know where you root. Exactly.
Yeah, that's awesome. I know we're going to have to wrap this up because we talked for a while today, which is fantastic. And I feel like we need to do like 500 miniseries. We didn't really have like a full direction that we wanted to go. We had some ideas. I had some questions, and this is just basically a lot of side tangents that are perfectly placed. I doubt we could do this again if we tried. But where can people reach out to you? And I know you're in Canada, but you do use virtual as well. Like you're able to do all of that. Is that correct?
Yeah. So the mass majority of my work is all through online. I would love to bring in-person stuff back in the summer, and as I say, I would love to, I will be. So if you're in Canada, then you can keep a lookout for that. I'm in Alberta, but everything that I have currently can be accessed through online. So I'm on all platforms. My website is at ryleejune.ca, RYLEE, June is in the month.ca. And if anything, just come if you have questions about intuition. I've had some people pop in there to cycle around from some interviews to tell me, similar to what you said, oh, this is witchcraft. I'm like, may God be with you. Like,
Yeah.
He says to not judge others. So, we all get to learn our lessons in different ways, but, come say hi. Let me know what you thought of the episode. If you have questions about intuition, I love to serve. I love to just let people know all about this stuff. So that I have tons of content, my podcast, my IG videos, reels, feed, like it's all there for you. And then of course I have courses and programs too, if you're interested in going deeper.
Awesome. I appreciate that. And I'll let us sign off with that before we go off on too many other tangents with this, but thank you again. Seriously, we'll have to figure out another day and time to shoot another one of these, because I can already tell like the content from this is going to be super valuable. I pop quiz you on the spiritual aspect of things to also kind of preface to see if somebody does reach out and say that on either our page, like you didn't listen to the entire episode. So
yeah.
So in a way it was like protecting ish, but but I mean the truth is the truth, and people are going to figure that out and take it whatever way, or read it, see it through whatever filter that they want to, and that's up to them. But thank you so much for being on here, and we'll talk soon.
Absolutely. It was an honor. Thank you.